Hi, I'm Adam. Welcome back to Godot Game Lab. In this short tutorial, we'll take a look at how you can implement auto-climbing stairs in Godot 4. In some platformer games or in more narrative-based games, you might want to implement climbing stairs like these just by pressing the arrow to control the character. And the way this is implemented is that it doesn't really affect how jumping works. So I can still use the jump action just like I could with any platformer games. And when I jump next to platforms, this behavior won't be triggered. So it only triggers when I'm next to stairs, which can be climbed. So if you want to follow along with the tutorial, I created a repository with the starter project, link in the description. You just need to go to code, download zip, and open up the project inside Godot. If you are only curious about the result and want to play around with the project, there is another repository called Godot Auto Climb Stairs, which is the reference project. So this is the completed version. Again, link in the description. You just need to go to code, download zip, and open up the project inside Godot. I have the starting project open here. We have our root node, which is a node 2D for the level. We also have a tile map layer node for the level layout where we have our tiles, except for the stairs, which are added individually because they are half the cell size we have for the tile map. The tile map is already set up with collisions and everything. Then we have two node 2Ds, the stairs left and the stairs right, which only have these static body children, which are the stair steps basically. And these are their own unique scene. So if we click on the Open in Editor button, you'll see that these are static body 2D nodes with the sprite 2D and the collision shape 2D attached to them. Simple as that. So these are instantiated here to create these half steps for the stairs. Then we have a canvas layer node for the background color, for the sky color. And we have the player scene, which is the character we can control. Also, we have the inputs set up for the game. So if we go to project and project settings and input map, we have 3 actions for going left, going right, and jumping with these buttons assigned as well. For the player scene itself, we have a character body 2D, an animated sprite with 3 animations ready to go, the idle, the jump, and the walking animations. And we have a collision shape 2D, which is a rectangle and positioned like this, attached to the player character. And you see the player has a script attached to it. And this is a default code you can generate from a template when you attach a script to the player, with the extra lines of code added for handling the animations. So this piece of code handles playing the correct animation. And this piece of code flips the sprite on the horizontal axis if the character is going to the left or to the right, but only when it actually changes direction. I don't really want to get into too much detail about this character controller because this is not what the video is focused on. If we play the game by pressing F5 or clicking on that button, you'll see that we can move around with the arrow keys, but the character gets stuck next to these stairs and I have to jump to move upwards. And this is where we want to actually implement the auto climbing, right? And to achieve this effect, we'll use a SeparationRayShape2D as a collision shape. So with our player, our root node selected, we can add a new collision shape again because collision objects can have multiple collision shapes attached to them. With the player selected, click on the plus sign or press Ctrl A to add a new child node and search for collision shape 2D. We'll add a new one and we'll get the warning message that we don't have a shape resource attached to it. And that's right, because it's still empty. Let's double click and rename this to something like auto climb. And for the shape, we won't add these basic shapes we usually use, but we'll add the SeparationRayShape resource instead. Click on that new resource and you can barely see if we zoom in that we have this downwards arrow right here. And we can change the length however we want it to. For this demo, I use 48 pixels and you'll see that the arrow goes from this position all the way to the bottom of the player. But in itself, this would do nothing because the way this works is if this raycast, this arrow collides with something, it tries to separate the parent object from it. And so we actually want to move this down, all the way down, to make sure that it gives this illusion of jumping the player. So the way we do this is we go into move mode by pressing W, and then we can just press and hold shift and start dragging down this arrow all the way to the bottom of the player. So whenever we collide with something along this arrow, this is the height the player will jump up to actually auto climb those stairs. So if we save this and run the game again, what happens is the player will be floating around. So we already kind of see we have this auto climbing working, but it looks a bit weird that the player is always 48 pixels above everything, right? And if I try to go to the left, we get stuck inside this blue block. So what's going on here? If we go to debug, toggle visible collision shapes and run the game again, you'll see exactly what this arrow does. Or as I say, you'll see, you won't see anything because there's a lot of blue on the screen. So one thing we can do is we can change the debug color of this SeparationRayShape2D by clicking on this property and set it to more visible purple color, for example. And now you can see the arrow. So basically when we collide with the next stair, it keeps this distance between the player and that arrow, right? In itself, this doesn't work for our cause, but what we can do and use is if we go to the remote scene tree for a second, and take a look at this auto climb node, what we can do is we can toggle the disabled property of this. So if I click on this disabled and set it to on, you'll see that the player will go back to the ground because this arrow turns gray. And as soon as I toggle this disabled again and go back to the game, you'll see again we have this separation. So this is the property we can use to detect if we need to turn this on or off. And what we'll do is we try to detect if we are next to a stair step, and if we are, we turn disabled off to lift up the character from the ground. And to do this, we'll use raycasts. So with the player selected again, click on the plus sign or press Ctrl A and add a new node 2D just to keep things organized. Double click and rename this to something like stair checker. And with the stair checker node 2D selected, press Ctrl A again and search for raycast 2D. And this will add this arrow again, and we can set the target position for this raycast to be 0 on the Y and something like 36 on the X. And you'll see this arrow appearing here. And again, we can position this however we want it to. I'm still in move mode, but if you are not, you can always go back to move mode by clicking on this icon here or pressing W, press and hold shift and position it however we want it to. I think this position will be fine to detect the stairs next to the player. So if we save this and run the game again, the way raycasts work, if the enabled property is on, you'll see this blue arrow here, and if I collide with something, it turns red in this debug screen. So we see it's colliding with something. And it's kind of hard to tell if it works because this auto climb is enabled by default. So we need to turn the disabled property to on. This way, when we run the game, we start from the ground and you see it's fine because it collides with the stairs. And when this collision happens, this is when we want to turn this arrow, this separation ray shape on, so we climb up. See, the problem is one raycast might not be enough to detect this. Why? Well, because if I walk next to a wall, it still collides, and this would be recognized as being next to a stair even though I'm next to a wall. So the way we can circumvent this problem is by creating another raycast. So I'm selecting this raycast 2D, pressing Ctrl D to duplicate this, still in move mode, press and hold shift and move this all the way up to the eye line of the character. And we can rename these two nodes. So we can call the bottom one something like stair check and the other one something like top check. And you see, if we run the game now, when I'm next to a stair step, only one of those two raycasts is colliding. And when I move next to a wall, both of those will collide. So this is how I can differentiate between walking next to a stair step and being next to a wall or a full block. This is cool because now we have a condition we can apply when we want to turn this thing on. And to make it easy to access these two raycasts, we can select them, right-click on them, and access them as scene unique names, so it will be easier to grab them inside our script. So now let's do the coding part where we actually implement this. Click on the script icon next to the player and see what we need to do here. We can actually do this with really simple lines of code. When we perform a jump, we can be 100% sure that we don't want to auto climb anything. So in this case, when we press the jump and we were on the floor, we'll grab the auto climb collision shape 2D node and set the disabled property to true. And finally, we can do the auto climbing thing. So if we scroll all the way down when we perform move and slide and move the character, then we can do the auto climbing. So we'll do 2 safety checks. First of all, we check if we have a moving horizontal direction. Why do we need this? Well, because if we start moving in any direction, we grab the input axis with the left and right actions, and this will be either a negative value on the x if we move to the left, or a positive value if we move to the right. So we check if this direction vector we're moving on the horizontal axis is not a 0 vector. This means that the character in this frame is moving to the left or the right. And we also need to check that we have a 0 or positive velocity, meaning that we are not performing a jump. Because when we jump, we'll apply a negative jump velocity, right? If we scroll all the way up, you'll see that the default jump velocity in this case is minus 400, because moving up means subtracting from the y coordinates. Basically, what we check here is that we are on the ground and we are moving horizontally during this frame. And then we can just check if we are next to a stair step or not. And what we do is we check if it's true that the top one, which is the eye level raycast, it's not colliding, meaning we are not next to a wall block, and that the stair check, the bottom raycast, is colliding. And this is exactly the condition we saw during the playtest, right? The bottom raycast arrow was red and the top one was blue, meaning it wasn't colliding. If this is true, this Boolean value, it means we are next to a stair. And when we apply this to the auto climb collision shape node's disabled property, we want to flip this, right? Because we actually want to disable it when we are not next to a stair, and we want to enable it, or in other words, set the disabled to false when we are next to a stair. And that's it. With these couple, like 4 lines of code, we have our auto climbing mechanic. So if we save this with Control S and press F5 to run the game, we should have our auto climbing mechanic. You'll see that the arrow is disabled by default. And when I walk next to the stair, my character walks up and this arrow very briefly turns purple. But when I'm next to a wall, you see both of those raycasts are colliding and my character won't auto climb anything. And if we perform a jump, everything works fine. I can still jump around and move around, but when I'm next to a stair and I'm moving, the character climbs that. You'll see if it's colliding, but I'm not moving, meaning there's no horizontal movement, there won't be an auto climb performed. But if I start moving and press the right arrow key, I climb this thing. But you'll see we have one tiny problem here. When I walk towards the left, there's no auto climbing happening. Why? You'll see the arrows are still facing to the right. So there's one tiny bug we need to fix here, which is when we flip the sprite as well. When we change direction, we actually need to flip both of those raycasts too. So a trick you can use for something like this is to set the scale from 1 on the x to -1. And what we do is exactly that. We grab the stair checker node, which is the parent of both of those raycasts, if you remember this one, and say that this should scale according to the directions sign, which will be either -1 or 1. If we save the script again with Control S and run the game with F5, now you see when we start running to the right, the thing still works. But when I actually move to the left, you'll see the arrows flipped. So when I walk towards the left, auto climbing will work for that direction as well. And I still won't auto climb walls. And I can move around the map and perform all of these typical platforming actions, but the auto climbing works. If you want to test this without the annoying overlay of debug shapes, we can go back to debug and turn off visible collision shapes when we are 100% sure that it's working. And if we run the game again, we finally implemented the whole thing. Awesome. So that's it for this video, and I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. If you like my content, please consider checking out my Ko-fi page where you can donate one time or become a member and get early access to all my content and videos.